right, good morning. Good morning. That was a great job with my last name, by the way. He practiced in advance. Really happy to be here with you guys today. I've had a great time at the Startup Turkey Conference already. People often ask me what's my favorite part about working at HubSpot. I consistently say that it is the people that I work with and the fact that most of them are smarter than me. I can honestly say the same thing about being here at the Startup Turkey Conference. 2 of probably the 10 best conversations that I've had in the last year has happened with the people that I've met here so far. So, my name is Sam Mallikarjunan. I work at HubSpot Labs. Shameless plug, I'm the author of the book, How to Sell Better Than Amazon. Thanks to our publisher, it is, yes, ironically available for purchase on Amazon. Real quick show of hands. Has anybody heard of HubSpot? Anybody familiar? Okay, a few people are familiar with HubSpot. I'll get with our marketing team to improve that. Today what I'm going to talk with you about is how HubSpot Labs works inside of our company to test new startup ideas, new products, and new technologies. Before I get started, obviously data analytics is very important to speakers, as important as it is to your companies. So I want to establish a baseline. Right now, this is about the least excited that you could possibly be. I want to see what happens if you're the most excited you could possibly be, because I'm going to use applause as a meter throughout my talk to help me gauge whether or not you're getting value from this. So I'm going to name 3 things, and at the end of those 3 things, if you like any of those 3 things, give me a big round of applause. That way I know what the most excited you could possibly be is. So the first thing is puppies. This is my dog Simon. The second thing is baby pandas. And the third thing is profits. If you like puppies, pandas, or profits, big, okay. All right. Okay, so now I have my upper limit. I have my upper limit. So now give me a round of applause if you have a smartphone. Okay, I think actually more of you have a smartphone than like puppies, pandas, or profits. Smartphones are an amazing piece of technology. In your pocket, you have access to the collective knowledge and history and wisdom of the entire human race, along with a phenomenal number of cat videos. It also makes life interesting for me as a speaker, because for the rest of the time that I'm up here, I have to compete with every piece of content that has ever been created by anyone at any time. Fortunately, there is some justice in the universe, because after you leave here, so do you. In your marketing campaigns and in your growth campaigns, you have to compete with everything that anybody has ever created. And it wasn't always this way. Public speaking, on the most part, hasn't changed that much. You know, I can project my voice further because of microphones. I've got nice presentation technologies. But for the most part, I still do my speeches on the same principles that Aristotle wrote about in his book on rhetoric 2.5 millennia ago. What has changed is you. It's the audience. It's the customer of the product that I'm creating. New technologies go through this adoption over time. So, 15 years ago, obviously nobody had a smartphone. 10 years ago, we were just starting to sort of get into the smartphone revolution. 5 years ago, lots of people had a smartphone. And now here, today, almost every one of you actually has a smartphone. So it goes through this beginning process where the innovators are the first people to adopt your technology. Then you get these early adopters who adopt your technology, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. The laggards would be, for example, my mother, who just switched off of dial-up internet a couple of years ago, as opposed to, obviously, most people who have been on broadband. And it's not even just this nice, smooth curve anymore. So disruption and disruptive innovation used to be something that happened over the course of decades or even centuries. Now, disruption and product adoption is something that happens over the course of years, sometimes even months. Instead of this nice, smooth bell curve, you've got this immediate curve where you've got these trial users with a small number of people, maybe your first 1,000 or 10,000 users. And then really quickly, you scale up the adoption and make a big dent in the universe. So I'm going to tell you what we do at HubSpot. Part of it, like I said, is exploring new technologies and new markets. Part of it is us figuring out how we can kill our own company before you enterprising folks in the audience figure out how you can kill our company. The first framework that I use stands for fake it, iterate, retain, scale up, and test. We're going to go through that. I do want to give you one caveat. Some of the stuff that I'm going to tell you is going to make, if you're a really smart person, it's going to make your brain hurt because it's sort of counterintuitive to what you want to do, what you want to be working on in order to sort of grow and launch a startup. But I will also add the caveat that many of the best entrepreneurs in the world aren't really that smart. Some of the smartest people that I know can do, calculus on a napkin, and some of the best entrepreneurs that I know couldn't do calculus with a calculator. The first thing that I'm going to tell you that's counterintuitive is this idea. This is constantly something that I struggle with my team at HubSpot, which is keeping them focused. So has anybody ever seen the TV show MASH? It was an American TV show. Quick round of applause. Okay, almost as many people as like Baby Pandas have seen the TV show MASH. So one of the great characters in this is Charles Winchester. He had a great quote when he was asked, why is it that he gets assigned the really tough medical challenges? The answer that he gave was he does one thing at a time, he does it very well, and then he moves on. The natural inclination of entrepreneurs is to chase what we call shiny balls. I've been accused of this as well, shiny ball syndrome. One of the most frustrating things about managing engineers is the fact that, quick round of applause, anybody an engineer, like a software engineer, software developer? Okay, yeah, managing you guys is a pain. Because once you figure out how to solve a problem, you're not that interested in it anymore. You want to go you want to go work on another problem that's still interesting and still unsolved. One of the hardest challenges that we have as entrepreneurs is building organizations, keeping the organization focused on doing one thing at a time, doing it very well before we move on. So I call this the first framework. Part of that is because I like the acronym FIRST. It's a little bit controversial. People think, oh, it's not the FIRST framework. FIRST is an acronym. Step 0, before you start any of this, is to define your user assumptions. If you're going to launch a new product, if you're going to launch a new startup, define what it is you're assuming about your users and focus obsessively on that. If you've ever done agile development or if you've ever done Scrum, you've probably heard of the user story, which is just as an X, I want to Y so that I can Z. So as a friend hanging out, or as an individual hanging out with my friends on the weekend, I want to be able to easily and seamlessly send them money so that I don't have to tally it up and write a check at the end. Another way is to focus on what's called the jobs to be done framework. So the jobs to be done framework isn't what the customer wants as a feature. Customers are actually pretty bad at knowing what features you should build. The jobs to be done is what is the customer actually hiring you to do as a business. The classic example of this is nobody wants a 1/4-inch drill bit. I've traveled a fair bit. I still have yet to run into somebody who's a 1/4-inch drill bit collector. They want a 1/4-inch hole. By focusing on this, the job to be done that the customer is hiring you to do, this gives you a set of user assumptions that you can then test throughout your process. Chris Skinner sort of scooped my Henry Ford quote earlier in the day, but the classic quote for this is Henry Ford, which is if he had asked his customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. In reality, what they wanted to do was get from point A to point B as cheaply, as quickly, and as safely as possible. So let's start with the F. The F is fake it. And again, this is going to be a little counterintuitive for the really, really smart people in the room. Before you actually start building products, what you should do is make sure that this is something that you should build. The first thing that I like to do if I'm going to launch a new product is to create an animated explainer video. So if you can't articulate your concept to an animator and get it into a 90-second script, you probably need to think more about the value that you're trying to offer and scope down the product that you're trying to build. It's way cheaper, it's way faster to build an animated explainer video than to write a bunch of code, go to market with a product, and try and onboard customers into something that they don't like. By the way, one of you startups that presented yesterday uses the exact same Canadian freelancer that I use for these because we have the same characters. I found that amusing. The second thing that you can do is just create a landing page first to see if people will sign up for the thing. So like most of you, I've had the occasional interesting product idea. I had an idea for a newsletter, a political newsletter in the United States, where you'd take a political alignment quiz and we'd send you the content that's the opposite of what you currently believe, instead of that's the same as what you currently believe. Not really a startup, but an interesting product idea. Not really inventing incredible technology, but before I built that technology, I wanted to make sure it was something people wanted. So I created a landing page, I created some Facebook ads, $200, and 2 days later, I had people who had signed up for the thing before I built it, and I had great feedback, comments on the ads, email exchanges with the people to really find out what it was they wanted before I actually invested the time and effort in building a product and going to market. The third thing that you can do if you already have a user interface and you want to know, should I build a new product or should I build a new feature for my users? One thing that we love to do is put a button for that feature into the product. Nobody clicks the button for the thing, don't build the thing. So we had somebody on our team who had the hypothesis. One of the products we built was inbound.org. Quick round of applause. Has anybody heard of inbound.org? Oh, really? Oh, awesome, cool. Let's meet later. So inbound.org is a marketing community that we're building to sort of insulate ourselves against the network effects that like LinkedIn and a lot of other people are working on. It's a great community where marketers can sort of go and ask each other questions and get help. One of our team had the hypothesis that what people really want is to have the experience structured around their level of skill. Because there's some people who are completely new to marketing, don't know anything. There are some people who are really sophisticated marketers and just want to focus on that. That's not an insubstantial product change. And before she had our developers go through and make those changes, she just put a button up on the site, said beginner, intermediate, advanced, and then had that link to some content that she had manually curated, and then tried to see if anybody was going to click it. Nobody's going to click the button for the thing. Don't build the thing. Next survey. Has anybody, a quick round of applause if you've heard of the Wizard of Oz. All right. If you haven't, I don't feel bad about spoiling it for you because it's been out for the better part of a century, so there's no spoiler alert here. But The Wizard of Oz is a movie about these people. They go on this journey to find the great and powerful Wizard of Oz. And he's this mystical being, this like holographic floating head in the middle of the room, this powerful, booming voice, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz. And then the dog runs over and pulls back the curtain, and it's actually just this guy pulling on some levers, making it all work behind the scenes. Now this is one of the fake it methodologies, which is where you build a front end, which is a lot easier to build and a lot more easier to change, before you build the back end of your startup, to make sure that people actually want what you have before it exists. Because I don't think, over the past 5-10 years, we've seen incredible technologies built. I don't not have faith that you could build the amazing thing. The thing isn't that you need to prove that. What you need to prove is that people want the thing that you want to build. If I was an investor, I would absolutely invest in the great and powerful Oz over here, because without writing a single line of code, he managed to get an entire group of people to turn over their entire city to him without having to write a single line of code. The fourth thing, crowdfunding campaigns. Eric Ries, quick round of applause if you read the Lean Startup. Okay, if you haven't, phenomenal book. You really should read the Lean Startup. A lot of this philosophy is based on sort of that foundational work. Before he wrote his second book, he ran a Kickstarter campaign for it. And he got almost something like 10,000 people. They pledged $600,000 before he actually wrote the book. Got him some cash, in his case a lot of cash. But if you want to see if people want what you have, get some cash, get some validation. There's a company called Fortified Bicycle, which does this for every new product that they launch. They launch a crowdfunding campaign, make sure that they can get some money from some people for the thing, and get some validation before they actually go to market with the product. So after all this, when you finally found something that you think adds value for the customer, you've got some data, you've built a product, this is when you start to iterate. So it's not always the big changes that you need to make in your product. It's not usually new features. This is something we've struggled with a lot in labs. Our temptation is always to build a massive set of new features. We're really upset that the inbound marketing group on LinkedIn has so much activity, and while LinkedIn has all this messaging functionality, why don't we build a peer-to-peer messaging functionality and see if that helps? Absolutely the wrong way to go about it. Focus on the small changes for the core value proposition that you have right now. Don't chase the big deal fast cash. This is something that I see startups deal with a lot. You'll have somebody come up and say, like, Pepsi is going to give me a ton of cash if the only thing that I do is rebuild our product in this specific way. Usually the wrong thing to do. Google the story of Wistia and HBO and find out about a startup that turned down a bunch of cash, took 2 years to make that same amount of cash back, but was able to build a big, successful, sustainable business after it. Decide who you want to be. Decide whether you want to build a product for acquisition. Decide whether you want to build a product that's good for the world or good for the customers, where you want to fit on sort of that quadrant, and really focus on that. I've seen a lot of startups trip themselves up because they started down a path that didn't fit with their culture, it didn't fit with what they wanted to do. Their marketing team couldn't keep up with the product that they were trying to do and the positioning that they wanted to have. Ask for help. This presentation was actually designed by a freelancer. I'm a big fan of using freelancers whenever I can. Even though we have a brand and buzz design team at HubSpot, it would have been expensive, both in opportunity cost and time, to have them build this, and I am a terrible, terrible designer. My skills are limited to Microsoft Paint. And then, throughout the iteration process, your goal is to be seeking product market fit. So this is a great graphic by a guy named Henrik, who really well illustrated, I think, how iteration works when you're building a product. So if you think the thing that the market wants is a car, the wrong thing to do is to give them a wheel, then give them a wheel on a chassis, then give them a wheel on a chassis with a frame. Because at this point, you haven't actually delighted anybody except, your 3 best friends and your mother, who are going to buy whatever it is that you create. The right thing to do is say, like, okay, I want this thing that gets me around, this skateboard. Okay, now I have this thing that gets me around that I can actually control. Now I have this thing that gets me around faster, which is this bicycle. Now I have this thing that gets me around a lot faster, which is this motorcycle. Now I have this thing that gets me around a lot faster, has AC, and is a lot more comfortable, which is a car. This is how you iterate products as you grow. Make sure that you focus. There's going to be a lot of fascinating distractions, and one of the most important skills of entrepreneurship is, if you have 2 $1 billion opportunities, pick one and ignore the other one entirely. Don't allow your focus to be distracted between 2 things. Do one thing at a time, do it very well, and then move on. How to know when you found product market fit? There's different thoughts. Eric Ries, incredibly unhelpful with, if you have to ask, you haven't found it. Scott Cholson with, if your site goes down and a bunch of people aren't calling you to complain, that's a bad sign. Sean Ellis, a little bit more methodical in his metrics, who says 40% of users should say that they're very disappointed if your product didn't exist. And then probably the most metrics-oriented one, Alex Schultz, says that if your retention curve is asymptotic to the x-axis, that's when you know that you found product market fit. To illustrate his point here, what he's referring to is a retention curve of people who start using your product. If that line ever reaches 0 from a specific time index where the x-axis is time, that means that you've lost all of the users who at some point started using your product. This is what it looks like. Dan and Brian and our team at HubSpot Labs created this beautiful graphic. This is how we look at it at HubSpot Labs. And it's never this simple, right? So this is time, this is people who are using it, this is bad retention, this is good retention. It's never quite this simple, and there's always subsections of people who are using stuff, and that's what you're really looking for when you're looking for product market fit. Our CEO wrote a great article on medium.com where he talked about the fact that in the early days of HubSpot, we had these beautiful top-of-the-funnel tools, content, SEO, keywords, things like that, and these really terrible middle-of-the-funnel tools, marketing automation and email. But it turned out that people who used our middle-of-the-funnel tools were way less likely to cancel. We had a better product market fit with those people than we did with just the top-of-the-funnel folks. Just as important of knowing why customers started using your product is asking them why they stopped. So focusing on retention, this is step 3. Again, I'm going to hurt your head if you're a really smart person. You can outgrow churn for a really long time. When you're starting a company, really militantly obsessing over churn is actually not the first thing that you want to do. You want to fake it, you want to iterate, you want to grow really, really fast. Don't try and get your square peg customers to love your round hole product. Either find round hole customers or build a square peg product. Be sure that your definitions really do matter. There's a startup out there that will shall remain nameless that counts unique visitors as their daily active users. Doesn't matter. As long as you agree, your investors agree, that your team understands what they're working on, be extremely clear on what you're defining as your goals. And then, once you figure all that out, then you can do the really smart, really fun stuff that the smart people love to work on of retention. So Nir Eyal has the great hook canvas, which you can learn more about on Google. It's more commonly illustrated as an actual hook. This is how you build product experiences that are addictive. This is how you actually get people to retain in the experience that they're building. The last thing is, or the second to last thing is scale up. Remember that perfection is the enemy. You don't want to build something that's perfect. You want to build something that people will use and that can grow. Once you've found fit, grow as fast as you can. So a lot of you guys, particularly with your marketplace strategies, your insulative advantage, the thing that's going to make you successful in a big, awesome company, is not actually your technology. It's going to be the community that you build that powers those marketplaces. Break apart the model. So you're scientists, right? You're not gunslingers in the Wild West. You're scientists in a lab. Break apart the model, figure out what's working, isolate the components, and work on all of those in sequence. Equally important to what you are going to focus on is what you're not. We use a framework called MSPOT, which is mission, strategy, playbook, omissions, and then targets. Omission is the most important part to me. There are things that I know that we're not good at that we are intentionally going to be okay with not being good at. We're not great at conversion rate optimization. We've got 500 visitors a month. We couldn't get good at conversion rate optimization even if we wanted to. We couldn't have a statistical sample size. And finally, this may not translate quite well, but if you've done accounting classes in the United States, at some point you'll come across the acronym that stands for cash flow is more important than your mother. It's supposed to be a joke. We're not actually telling you to not love your family. I would actually append to that if cash flow is more important than your mother. I've seen lots of startups who grew themselves out of business, that growth is then more important than your father. Make sure that you manage both of these things together to have a happy, healthy family in your startup. Focus on growing what you can. I was once in a meeting where we had a 20-slide presentation analyzing the churn rate for a segment of the business. And then when I asked for the raw data later, I'm kind of a data nerd, I like to play with it, it turned out that we were analyzing 4 customers. You know what the statistical significance is on a sample size of 4? Not a lot. Focus on growing the things that you can. Before you're looking at first-touch attribution for your blog to see what's driving the most leads for your sales team, see if you can grow the subscriber base to the blog. Get to 1,000 subscribers, 10,000 subscribers before you start worrying about, did I get 2 leads this month or did I get 4 leads this month, and that's a 100% lift. That's not how you optimize and grow your product. Always be testing. Again, you're not gunslingers in the Wild West. You're scientists in a lab. Constantly isolate these variables, develop hypotheses all the way back to step 0. Either a user story as an X, I want to Y so that I can Z, or as I've defined a job to be done and I'm going to test this and try and validate this job. You'll find that unless you're just entirely in the wrong job or you're in the wrong industry, there's never a shortage of ideas. The shortage is in your ability to actually execute. So we use very ultra-sophisticated technology to manage our projects in HubSpot Labs. It's by a startup based out of California. You may have heard of Google Sheets. We have everybody just enter their ideas, enter the part of the funnel that it's relevant to. They sort of enter their ideas free form. And then I, as the team leader, if I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, I'm really concerned about our activation rate, I can go back to this sheet, and then I can sort by the activation phase of the funnel, and I can go back to the person who originally proposed that and say, let's design an experiment. Then we go through a process where we write out a document. It's a fair amount of work. It's probably a half hour, maybe 45 minutes worth of work to really define a hypothesis, have a start and end, design a good experiment. But it does a lot of things. First of all, it builds a knowledge base of things we've tested before so our team can actually scale and grow. Second of all, it makes sure that we're not wasting resources testing things that we can't validate. Once we have the products, or once we have our experiments in motion, again, we use a very sophisticated tool, which is a separate tab in Google Sheets, to manage things that are in progress, that have a specific end date, and then we have a call when the experiment ends, and it's either won or it was not a win. We've either validated the hypothesis or we haven't. So a lot of this may seem dry. This is the scientific, methodical application of growth. This is what we do at HubSpot Labs. But I do want you to come away with, this is an incredibly exciting time to be alive. Sometimes I lament that, frankly, I wasn't old enough in the 80s to actually, be there for the first, really exciting developments in computer science. But this is an equally exciting time, maybe even more exciting. Like I said, disruptions aren't happening in decades. They aren't happening in centuries. They're happening in years. It's, only 15 years 12 years maybe since, the real social networks started taking part, completely redefined the way that we live our lives. Even in the United States, which is obviously considered a relatively mature market, 70% of the companies on the Fortune 1000 are brand new within the last 10 years. You start applying that to emerging markets and the entire potential of the rest of the world, there's an incredible amount of exciting potential. Thank you very much. I didn't put anything on the end of this slide, but we actually have a program where we work specifically with startups. So just Google HubSpot for startups, and you can learn more about how you can work with HubSpot to help grow your startup. Thank you very much.